put his hand on my shoulder and said, I will see you again. This is what a man does. You suck it up. You do what you do.
Is that something that has stayed with you for your whole life?
At the end of that, I looked up at that flag flying in that blue sky, and it was the first time in my life that I was proud to doing violence.
That in and of itself is an inspirational story.
I was jumping 3 times a week. I was doing diving. I was doing all this ninja stuff, but there was no purpose in it other than waiting for something to happen. I was not making a difference.
I know that you were the equivalent of a 2-star general.
I've had 6 overseas tours total, 50 different countries, TDY, temporary duty assignments. As a people, we tend to underestimate our enemies. We knew something was going to happen.
Why would you encourage somebody to become involved with the CIA?
The only thing that I miss is my colleagues and the mission. If that's not a mission, I don't know what is.
Definitely sounds like a mission to me. On this episode of Boundary Breakers, we sit down with retired CIA executive Ric Prado. Ric has an unbelievably fascinating story. He and his family fled Cuba when he was 10 years old. He ended up joining the CIA in the 1980s, tells us stories of when he led the hunt for Osama bin Laden beginning in 1995, and about being the chief of the counterterrorism division when 9/11 happened. Ric provides a behind-the-scenes look into the CIA during 9/11 and shortly thereafter. Including how he and his team put together the group that would be the first boots on the ground in Afghanistan, hunting down Al-Qaeda. Ric is an unbelievably humble and charismatic guy who tells some of the most interesting stories about the CIA and about 9/11 that I've ever heard. So stick around. I really think you're going to enjoy this one. Boundary Breakers is brought to you by Carter and Clark. But just really quick background, so you sort of get your bearings on, where we are, what we're doing. I've read a lot about you. I've read your book. I've seen your episodes on Team House and with Jack Carr, a couple of other podcasts, which were very interesting. The name of our podcast is Boundary Breakers, and the premise of this show is we seek out extraordinary individuals that have, either, like in your case, come from humble beginnings and broken boundaries to do extraordinary things for this country, or others are CEOs, business leaders. We've had retired Delta Force folks on, retired SEALs, and I'm just excited to dig into everything that you have to offer and your background. But the purpose of it is to share stories, the stories of these remarkable folks, so that we can learn from and inspire the next generation, whether it is somebody that is interested in the CIA or the military, or becoming a better leader. But being able to share with the rest of the world and with our audience stories as inspiring as yours is just very much a fun thing to do. So we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Brandon. That's pretty much the reason I wrote the book. There was 3 purposes behind the book. One, of course, was to portray my agency in a realistic light, not in the Jason Bourne, American-made stuff that is fed to the majority of the audience.
Right.
The second was to honor my colleagues, because we have a terrible reputation, again, in the media, especially in Hollywood. We're all assassins who betray our country and do operations behind Congress's back and all this other BS. And the third is like you mentioned, if I can touch a young individual like I was touched when I was like 20 years old, and get them on the right path, that's a big plus for me.
Absolutely. Well, now that you mentioned that, I couldn't help but notice several times in the book, you make sure to point out that, contrary to the way that Hollywood portrays this particular aspect or that particular aspect, this is what it is. For example, when you were talking about, and I'm sorry for the aside here before we jump into it, but when you were talking about what a case officer does, which is as opposed to an agent, right? And you were saying Hollywood always gets this wrong. They call us CIA agents. The agents are the ones recruited on the ground in wherever you're stationed. But the case officer, I'm saying that correctly? The case officer?
That is correct. The case officer.
The case officer are the CIA personnel that does the recruiting of the agents. So I thought that was I thought it was great, very educational too, because you never know. Sometimes Hollywood gets it right, sometimes they get it wrong. I think there's a lot of things that you're helping everybody understand that Hollywood got wrong. But Ric, look, if it's all right with you, I would love to just start briefly with just sort of your origin story so that everyone can know, the audience understands just generally where you came from and the sort of the obstacles that you faced, and then talk about how you how you found the CIA and how you decided for a career in the CIA. And then some of your more, would love to just discuss some of your sort of more notable experiences or achievements, or really from your perspective, what you would like to talk about with regard to lessons learned, what you're most proud of. And then toward the end, would love to just connect it to a couple of your thoughts in terms of lessons for the next generation, or for the folks that are, civilians out in the business world, et cetera. And then we can conclude. Does that sound all right with you?
Yep, as long as you prompt me on each one, because I'm old and I can remember everything.
You got it. I will drive. I promise you that. I promise you that. Excellent. Well, so could you just, born in Cuba, I think your story of where you came from is amazing and inspiring. Can you just give us a few minutes and help us understand so the audience knows where you came from?
Yeah, I was about 8 or 9 years old when the revolution took over in 1959. Beautiful life. I had a horse before I had a bicycle. My dad had a nice business. He had a '57 Pontiac, a deuce and a half, and
nice.
a Jeep for his corporation. And in comes Castro. And fast forward, not even 6 months, I'm in uniform at the age of 9. Actually, at the age of 8, going to peasants' homes and teaching them how to read and write. Wow. This was a program to militarize and to separate the kids from the parents. In school, I went through things like the teachers telling you that Castro was better than God, and that if we heard our parents speak ill of Castro or the revolution, it was our duty to report them. And some kids did. Some kids actually did report their parents, so that's wow. The kind of brainwashing that was going on. So from a happy childhood, riding horses every day and shooting my BB gun, even though I was 6 or 7 when I got it, to seeing my father lose everything. His business was confiscated 6 months after Castro took over. My dad was quite the imperialist. He employed 10 people. Wow. I mean, yeah, come on. And the sad part of that story is that once my dad gave it up, they took it over. Not even a year later, it gone out of business because the machines had broken down, and my dad was the one that had built them. Hey. So it went from that to understand that we were being persecuted, that we were in a place where we had lost all our freedoms and lost all our money. All the monies were frozen. You could only have $200. If you had $20,000 in the bank, you got $200 worth of pesos. That was all you were allowed to. So my dad, wow. Right after the confiscation of his property, decided we need to leave. So we moved to Havana to expedite the process. And unfortunately, because my dad did have some good property, they were fighting over in the town that we was at, the hill, his Pontiac, and so they wouldn't let them leave. But I was able to get out through a Catholic program called Pedro Pan. And so I came to the United States at the age of 10 by myself to an orphanage in Pueblo, Colorado. I turned 11 at the orphanage. And my parents got out about just short of 9 months later. and I joined them in total poverty. We were definitely sub poverty. My dad was mowing lawns, loading trucks, whatever he could make ends meet. So quite a drastic change from my 8 to my 11.
Wow. 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 Look, I knew generally that you were born in Cuba and that you guys had to escape, but I didn't understand just how difficult that must have been. And I didn't understand it or didn't know the details. But look, I imagine that having that experience and living in a country where all of a sudden you're, if you're your father, all of a sudden your business has taken everything that you've ever worked for and spent your life building is just taken from you. And you're only allowed $200. I imagine that teaches quite a lesson and gives you a whole different perspective than a lot of folks, particularly with the younger generation. It's just difficult for a lot of people to imagine, I'd guess. Is that something, I mean, is that something that has stayed with you for your whole
Well,
life?
absolutely, Brandon. Obviously, going from the breast of my family to an orphanage where you have three or four different cultures, two or three different languages, and a lot of pissed off kids because nobody likes being an orphan.
Yeah.
So there was a growing culture shock there. There was a lot of fighting and violence there. But that never affected me as much as people believe that it did for two reasons. First, my dad brought me up to be the little cowboy, the little man, stoic. This is what a man does. You suck it up. You do what you do. When I got on that airplane, just before I got on my airplane to leave Cuba, my dad put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I will see you again." That was my security blanket with my dad. But the real point here is I didn't pay much of a price because I went from Cuba to becoming who I am in the country that I live in. But it was at the price of my parents' health and mental. I mean, it destroyed my mom to have to put her 10-year-old kid on an airplane, not sure that she was going to see him ever again. So I think the parents are the ones that made the real sacrifices in my life.
Well, look, Rick, that hits really hard for me. I've got five children, the oldest of which is 10. And so thinking about putting him on an airplane and putting my hand on his shoulder saying that I will see you again is difficult to even fathom. So look, that in and of itself is an inspirational story. And so I'm obviously thrilled to hear that they made it over and you guys met back up. How did you, where did you end up growing up? And then how did you end up making it into the CIA?
Yeah, when I came back, we were in the ghetto part of Miami.
Okay.
We lived six of us because we had my two cousins and my aunt living with us because they had come out about the same time I did. And but the American dream. My dad worked two jobs. My dad was a craftsman in carpentry that he learned as a child, and my mom went to a sweatshop and worked there for at least 15, 17 years. Within 2 years, we had bought a little house in Hialeah. I remember my dad paid $12,000 for the house in 1964, maybe 65. So I went to junior high school in Hialeah. I went to high school in Miami Springs, which is right adjacent to Hialeah. And growing up, I was a little wild. I guess it's because I was wired from the beginning for adventure, and then exacerbated by those early experiences.
Yeah.
I used to get A's and B's in school, but I used to get D's in conduct because I was always getting in fights and all this kind of stupid stuff, hanging around with the tough kids in the school. But anyway,
Yeah.
um, there was one incident. I had just started junior college. I wanted to be a professional diver, a marine science technician, and this is the hippie years. This is early 71.
Okay.
And the hippies announced that they were going to burn the American flag. The next day, they were going to take the American flag and inviting everybody to join. So I didn't have any friends in college yet. So I called 4 of my homies from high school because I said,
Mm.
no.
Good.
And obviously there was, a dozen hippies and there was 5 of us, and it wasn't a fair fight
Mm.
for that. Um, but, but here is the real clincher, and this is the God honest truth. At the end of that, I looked up at that flag flying in that blue sky, and it was the first time in my life that I was proud to doing violence. 6 months later, I was in the Air Force, trying out for a unit, which I managed to get in, called Pararescue, which is part
Yeah.
of our
Okay.
Special Operations Command. It's one of our Special Operations Forces.
Yeah. Really, I mean, that's a hardcore, difficult selection process. I mean, it's a very difficult unit to become part of.
Yeah, I thought I was tough. I was fit, and I could swim and I could fight and all this stuff. But after puking for 2 or 3 days at the beginning of pararescue selection, I said, "You got a long ways to go." But I did make it through, and I got my beret in real late 1972. Too late to go to Vietnam, which is actually what I wanted to do.
Okay.
Um, uh, to my parents' chagrin, because my draft number was very, very high. So the chances of me getting drafted, and here I go volunteer.
Mm.
Uh, Now I look back and I understand them a little better, because I lost my child at the age of 10. Now I'm going to lose them again at the age of 20. Was
Yeah.
fresh. So, but I made it through pararescue. I knew that I wasn't going to go to Vietnam. So in '74, I was full-time reserves, and that's the first time I applied to the agency. And the reason was I was jumping 3 times a week. I was doing diving. I was doing all this ninja stuff, but there was no purpose in it other than waiting for something to happen. I was not making a difference. So I applied to the agency in '74. If you know history, post Vietnam, the agency and the military was decimated. And they sent me a real nice note, pretty much saying, "Sorry, we're not hiring, we're firing." And so I stayed in the in pararescue as a reserves, but I also joined the Metro Miami Dade County Fire Department as a paramedic. Pararescuemen are EMT2s from the start. So I got accepted there really, really quick. I did 6 years with them. And then in
Wow.
1980, I reapplied to the agency. And now they were, I guess, bouncing back a little bit. And they called me up. They said, "Look, we cannot give you staff work right now, but would you be willing to come up once in a while and do contract as a paramilitary medic?" Says they explained to me that they have a paramilitary part of the agency called Special Activities Division, or was called back then, and that they would need it medics with my kind of background, paramilitary background, besides my, you know, fairly strong paramedic skills.
Right.
Yeah, so I did that for about 6 months, but it was tough because I was having to take leave to go for 2 weeks and all that. So I let that lapse for a while, and then Ronald Reagan came in. And when Ronald Reagan came in, he declared war on communism in our turf. And believe it or not, because of the attrition, at the time, the agency did not have a single native Spanish speaking individual who had my military background.
Wow.
So they called me up and they said, and I had just gotten divorced like a month before from my first marriage. I've been married 43 years on my current one, but I had just gotten divorced, and they called me on a Thursday, and they started giving me the pitch. I said, "Look, let me ask you one single question. Is this part-time contract again, or is this full-time?" And they said, "No, this is full-time." And he says, "When do you want me there?" He says, "When can you be here?" I was at headquarters the following Monday.
Wow.
And 2 weeks later, I was sent down to the Nicaragua-Honduras border for the start of what was called the Contra program, our efforts to build up the resistance against the communist Sandinista regime that had taken over Nicaragua.
Mm. Wow. Wow. That's incredible. So I mean, you knew what you wanted, and you were devoted and dedicated. And when you got your opportunity, when that door opened, you blasted through. That's really inspiring. Can you explain for the audience looking for me too, right? I think I understand, but could you explain maybe the difference between the different branches or departments within the CIA? Like I've always known it to be called Ground Branch, which I believe is a special activities division, and how that differs from case officers and what those different departments do, so that we can dive into that just a hair.
Yeah, the agency is divided in directorates. We have the Directorate of Intelligence, which are our analysts, which are world class. I have nothing but pride and joy of working with them so closely. We have the Department of Security, Division of Science and Technology, and then we have the Directorate of Operations. This is the operational arm of the CIA. Within that directorate, they are divisions, and you have East Asia Division. You had Africa Division, European, Latin America, and so on. And then you had Special Activities Division, which is a direct offspring of the OSS days of World War II, where that was the structure. You had Special Activities Division, you had Special Operations Groups, and then you had Ground Branch, Maritime Branch, and Air Branch. I was a Ground Branch individual for the for the first 11 years of my career. So now there is no difference between a case officer or an operations officer, as we also call them, from the PMO, paramilitary operations officer. And I was lucky enough, like always in my life, that I came in at a time when they were enforcing the fact that you could not just be a paramilitary officer and be in CIA. We are not the Central Airborne Agency. We are an intelligence agency. So I caught it right at the right time because I was groomed to become a case officer shortly after my first 3 years living in the jungles of Nicaragua, which was the best job I ever had. Nobody believes me when I say that, but sleeping in a jungle hammock for 3 years is not what most people call fun or a good experience. It definitely was for me. But it was the professionalization of the paramilitary guys and gals to become full-fledged case officers. There is no such thing anymore as an ops officer and a paramilitary guy. If you're a paramilitary guy, you have those extra tools. As a case officer, you have those extra tools of being a former military elite, military officer. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So you started in the special activities, and then spent several years in the field, and then went to the farm for the case officer, all the training, right?
Yeah, I was hired, like I said, in 71, late 71, I guess it was. I'm sorry, 81. And I was sent directly to the camps between Nicaragua and Honduras. And I was there for 3 years, no training whatsoever prior to that. I was full immersion, teaching these guys everything from patrolling to hit space and timing on a 50 cal and all this other stuff.
Oh my gosh.
When I got out of there, I had 2 years of college. So when I got out of there, this agency sponsored me for a year to finish my college. And from there, I went to the farm. I graduated from the farm in 1986.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my process in.
And then from there, you went back down to South America, right?
Yeah, I've had 6 overseas tours total. 50 different countries, TDY, temporary duty assignments. I went from the Honduran border to the charm of Costa Rica, but running the southern front. In the north, I was, for the first 14 months of the Contra program, I was the only American allowed in the camps. I was there as a Honduran captain, and then subsequently promoted to Major Alex, and that was my first PCS tour. After the farm, I got sent to Costa Rica to do the same with the southern front, but now without the umbrella of protection that we had from the Hondurans. Costa Rica were actually antagonistic to our goals because they were afraid of the Sandinistas. So it went from a very paramilitary carrying an AR-15 and a Browning high power and 2 grenades to coat and tie in Costa Rica and still meeting with the Contras and still sneaking them out of the country clandestinely for training and bringing them back and getting them the airdrops and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
I did 2 years there. It ended with the explosion of what became the Iran-Contra imbroglio there with Ollie North and a few others.
Yeah.
From there, I went to another Latin American country, which I'm not allowed to mention the name, but this was my first counterterrorist assignment.
Okay.
Most of my career was the first 10 years of my career were paramilitary. The other were counterterrorism, primarily, with the exception of my Korea experience, which I did that for 4 years. I worked in Korea. So I went to the third tour in South America to help the locals fight a Maoist insurgency that dealt a lot with narco trafficking and all that other stuff. Great assignment, very dangerous. I literally was able to recruit an agent from that particular terrorist group and ran him for well over a year. We got a lot of great information out of him. From there, I went on to the Philippines. So my back to back tours to spicy areas. And one little anecdote that I always like to add is that when I was awarded the assignment in the Philippines, which was going to be my first liaison, in other words, declared to the local services, the agency shrinks called me in, and they wanted to know why I was going on my fourth danger tour. And I looked at them and I said, I thought that's what you hired me to do. They scratched their head, whatever, and the rest is history. So I did the Philippines. That was my fourth. Korea, I was chief of liaison in Korea, 93 through 95.
Wow.
And that was my fifth overseas tour. Came back. I took over the Koreas. I was chief of the Koreas. I was deputy division chief for the Koreas in CIA. Did that for 2 years. That's what got me my senior grade, my flag rank, for lack of better words. And then I did another tour, this time without the family, to a radical Muslim country, which in the book, again, they don't let me say, but I call it Shangri-La.
Yeah.
It's
title redacted.
Very, very. But it was a lot of fun. It was a very, very intense period there because it definitely was Indian territory. But our job was literally trying to geolocate a mass of terrorists from different organizations that were using this country as a hotel. It was literally a hotel for, persecuted terrorists. So we were doing that at night and playing security during the day. I came back to the agency to take over as chief of operations at the Counterterrorist Center.
What year was that? Was that 98?
2001.
Oh, that was right in 2001. Okay.
Yeah, 98 through 2000, I was chief of the Koreas.
Gotcha.
Both at the agency and at the NSC. And then when I took over in CTC as the chief of ops, I took over in May of 2001.
Oh, my gosh. So that was going to be my next question. Thank you so much for walking us through that. So, and I certainly don't want to underplay the incredible work that you did from 1980 to 2001. But when you look back on your career, and forgive me because I have not gotten to this point of the book yet, so you may answer this in the book. But when you look back on your career, do you think about it like pre 9/11 and post 9/11? Is it?
Absolutely. I mean, 9/11 changed not only my agency, but the world. We don't know exactly where we were at when that incredible act of terrorism happened. For me, it hit very much to home because in 1996, I was already in the Counterterrorist Center. I started with Michael Scheuer, the Bin Laden task force, and became Alex Station. I was the deputy chief of station and senior ops officer. Mike Scheuer was a senior analyst. And so you're talking about from the ground, trying to track down Bin Laden, finding out what he was doing. We knew that he was in Khartoum. We had him pegged. We could have taken him out in 96, 97, 98. and politics never allowed us to do so, even though we had plenty of intelligence, all sorts of intelligence, that he was training hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of terrorists for what became Al Qaeda. Uh, so, yeah, I think our lives are divided into before 9/11 and post 9/11 because it changed everything else. I
Yeah.
remember when I first took over as chief of ops, Kofor Black, who was director of CTC and a very, very dear best boss I ever had. Uh, Kofor was frustrated because of his lack of funds. We were trying to develop, the agency is the one that took point in developing and sponsoring the development of the Predator drones. And
I
the
did not know
military
that.
gouging us, and to the point that Kofor was ready to stop the program. Well, come 9/11, that became one of our premier capabilities, number one. And number two, we had no shortage of cash. So,
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, I want to dig in a little bit to you know some of the things you mentioned about Bin Laden, and I want to be sensitive to. I imagine that I know that there are a lot of things that you can't answer, and I do not want to pry into anything that's classified or anything that isn't classified that you just would prefer not to answer. So please, if you'd prefer not to answer some of these questions, please let me know. But is what the press is what we read in the press about why you guys weren't allowed to get Bin Laden in '96? Is that accurate? Did it have to do with who the particular president was at the time and that particular president? Okay.
absolutely. At the time, we had pretty strong leadership in the agency. The division, the director of operations at the time, and the DCI were behind all the stuff. In '96, when we started the Bin Laden task force, we had a lot of traction and a lot of credibility within our building, and they were projecting this up to the White House. There was a gentleman who, unfortunately, we lost him a few years ago, legendary Green Beret and legendary CIA officer, who was one of my best friends, Billy Waugh. Uh, he had done surveillance in Khartoum, and he had written up report after report that's saying, we can take this guy out, we can kidnap this guy, we can bring this guy to justice. And in spite of the plethora of intelligence that we were getting from liaison services, from volunteers, from assets, from overhead of the terrorist camps, they never allowed us to execute any of the preemptive strikes that CTC stands for. And the highlight here, Brandon, is that imagine if we would have been able to neutralize Bin Laden in 1997. The Cole, our American embassies in Africa, and maybe even 9/11. It equates to if somebody could have shot Hitler in 1938.
Yeah. Gosh. Did you guys, were you guys given any reason, or was it just negative? Denied.
Not enough proof that he's bad. Not enough proof that he's bad. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow. I can only imagine how frustrating that was. Well, so, gosh, that's amazing. All right. Well, so 9/11 happens. How quickly did you guys know who was behind it? Or let me say this. When it happened, did you have a good idea in your gut who it was, who was behind it?
Yeah. We had an inordinate amount of intelligence that something big was brewing.
Okay.
Again, in the movies, the intelligence services know everything and everything that's going on, and that's not the way it is. Intelligence is more of a puzzle that you get different pieces from different sources, and you come up with, a hypothesis of what this map is going to look like.
Right.
So we knew that Al Qaeda was very actively pursuing a major attack. But remember, until 9/11, Hezbollah had also killed more Americans than any other terrorist group. So, you never say never. In our profession, you have to look at the facts. So we knew that there was something major happening. And then we knew that it was imminent when all of a sudden all their communications shut down, all their couriers stopped traveling, all their figureheads that we had surveillance on went underground. But we just did not. We knew something was going to happen, but we did not know what. And obviously, um, one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is that they believe that the terrorists are just ignorant camel jockeys. Well, the guys who flew those planes into our buildings had degrees and had learned how to fly and spoke several languages. So we as a people, we tend to underestimate our enemies.
Yeah, for sure. I could not agree with that more. But I think for those that are a little bit maybe aren't quite as short sighted, if you really sit down and think about it, to be able to pull something like that off requires a tremendous amount of devotion, dedication, intelligence, resources, money, time. I mean, it is as you know very well, but to help our audience understand, it's a world class operation to be able to pull off a world class event
And
like that.
incredible discipline in maintaining it a secret, because there were other things that we were able to disrupt because there were leaks. But this operation was run very, very tight. And I learned a lot from it, from starting Bin Laden to the experience in 9/11. I became a big proponent of we have to be preemptive. We have to be preemptive. We can't wait to go back after we've been knocked down to try to left hook this target. So
Yeah,
it's a game changer for.
I can only imagine. But I do think that's a good point. I want to make sure to elaborate on that. That I'm sure that you guys thwarted and stopped at various stages, obviously far more, planned attacks than attacks that actually went through. I mean, how many of these are we talking? I mean, are you guys, is the CIA stopping an attack a month or an attack a year? I mean, how many do you think that you stopped in that time frame?
Well, me personally, it is a team sport, so it's definitely us as the agency.
Yeah.
If I'm not allowed to tell you numbers
Okay.
of what I do know, because I was blacked out on the book also. But I guarantee you there are dozens of post 9/11 incidents in the United States and overseas that working with our agents, working with our overseas liaison officers, with our local law enforcement, that we've been able to disrupt. There's a couple of them in New York. There's been several throughout, and some overseas also. So the agency's counterterrorist center is a major component, and when it started by one of my mentors, Dewey Claridge, in 1986. It was maybe 15 people, and nobody wanted to go to it because it wasn't career enhancing. It wasn't mainstream, CIA ops officer to become a station chief, to become a director of a division. Um, and it grew to be the place that everybody wanted to be because it was the only game in town.
Wow. Wow. So were you closely involved with the first couple of teams that went in to Afghanistan? What was it, November maybe of
It was
2001?
late October. Late October. Absolutely. Like I said, I was the chief of ops. And my first act after, sending out cables, warning the world and tasking the world for what we needed, was in a meeting with Kofor. Kofor said, I need somebody to run special operations, make a temporary unit that's going to focus on us getting there. And he looked at me and says, who do you think it should be? And I said, Hank Crumpton. Hank Crumpton had been my predecessor as chief of operations, and he had just landed in Australia to be the chief of station in Australia. A dream job for a guy who was an avid outdoorsman.
Oh,
And
wow.
Cofer looked at me and said, that's exactly who I had in mind. And looked at me and says, call him. So I called Hank. He hadn't even unpacked his household goods yet. And I asked him, and, No surprise to me because I know Hank. Hank is a very dear friend of mine. Immediately he snapped to. And he came in and we worked together, putting the team together. I got him the deputy, John, who was an outstanding operator. He did not know him, but I had met him, and so on. And then the first team that we were able to put together, a good bunch of those guys were from my paramilitary side of the house that were going at there. Gary Schrum was the first team leader. He was an operations officer for nearest division, and his one of his last accounts had been dealing in Afghanistan with the Northern Alliance, and he spoke the language.
Yeah. I read Gary's book First In,
It's a
which
great book.
absolutely. And look, I knew the answer to that question before I asked it, but I wanted to, I would rather you tell the story instead of me talking, because look, I'm fascinated by all this, and the country and the world owes you and your colleagues a sincere debt of gratitude for the response that you guys put together and the teamwork that you guys showed and the sacrifices that a lot of you made to get over there and really initiate the entire campaign to help rid the planet of some of these folks. So on behalf of a lot of folks, I'm sure you've been told before, but thank you very much for everything, every ounce of energy that you poured into that. We sincerely appreciate it.
Well, like I said earlier, it is a team sport. And one point that since I have the platform that I would
Please.
love to make, because a lot of people don't realize this. First boots on the ground in Afghanistan, helping the Northern Alliance target the Taliban and Al Qaeda, were CIA operations officers.
Absolutely.
The Triple Nickel SF team that came in there, and I taught at Fort Bragg at SF for 8 years, so believe me, I'm a big admirer of them. They couldn't get in. When they finally were able to fly in, it was our guys vectoring in their helicopters. And this goes unsung. There's a movie where it's called 12 Strong.
So, yeah.
12 Strong, yeah. Extremely good movie if you're an SFer. But the agency's role in that movie was relegated to a single white guy on a donkey with bags full of money. And nothing could be further from the truth. Our guys were in every initial firefight and in every initial recon that was done on the ground with those Green Berets. Next to every single Green Beret that was there was one of my guys.
Mm. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. And look, I'll echo it. My understanding, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is it was exactly that all of the years of pre-work the CIA had done, Gary and the like, they had relationships with the local warlords and they understood the politics of what was going on and who was for and against the Taliban and who, you had the alliance between some of the northern warlords. And so you guys being the CIA, leveraged those connections, talked to all the different warlords and got them together and convinced them to be able to sort of accept our quote unquote help in going against the Taliban. And without, like you said, without the CIA assets, assets is not the right word. Without the CIA personnel, not only greasing the skids, but being there on the front lines, none of that would have ever happened. That we would have just, the military didn't have an avenue in. So that
Well, that is the job. Let's face it, that is exactly what the agency's supposed to do. We did it in World War II. A lot of unsung missions that were done by the OSS. That's our roots and that's our purpose for living, is being able to respond, have that flexibility that will allow us to bring the bigger guns in.
Gotcha. Well, so this is a perfect opportunity for the younger generation, or look, even for some older folks that are interested in potentially becoming part of the CIA or applying, but don't really understand what it is or what it means. What could in your mind, in your own words, what does it mean to be? Why would you encourage somebody to become involved with the CIA?
Well, the first thing that I would tell you is that I would not encourage you to join the CIA if you were looking for fame and fortune. Uh, we only get to praise each other inside our walls, and not until you're old and retired like me, you can start telling stories or whatever. So it's a very ungrateful mistress, very demanding. Uh, but you have to understand that any good case officer that's on the ground in any given country will one day come across a piece of intelligence that will go from his desk to the president. That is the nature of what we do. We collect intelligence. However, we also have to be able to act. So we have counter narcotics centers, and we had the counter-terrorist center. In each area division, for example, the old SC, that their job was, countering the Soviet Union expansion and spying against them. So it runs the gamut. What it is most rewarding is the action is the juice. When you get out there and you score on something big, or you do where you break into a terrorist safe house, like I did in that Latin American country, and compromised the cell because we had it on tape, what they were trying to do to the embassy.
Nice.
That's something that you not only live it, but you come back to headquarters and your friends know what you did. The close circle, they go like, "That was a good one." So that is that the purpose, having a purpose so well defined in what we do. Where war can be very blurry. I think that our profession is a little bit more focused in that, in war, a lot of things happen that you cannot control. We try to control everything that we can within our operations, and including, saving lives and not spending lives from anybody.
Yeah.
So the second thing is the quality of people that I worked with. I will tell you, I'm 72 years old. This dog can still hunt. The only thing that I miss is my colleagues and the mission. The rest, I don't care about, the rank and file and all this other pompous stuff. I miss that because it was such an incredible camaraderie. And part of it, I think, is not only the risks that we take, but the fact that we only can talk about those things or be known within our walls. You see a military, a two-star general, which was what I ended up being in the equivalent in the agency.
Right.
Walking around, rightfully so, with 15 rows of ribbons and jump wings and scuba badges and all that stuff. Our badge in the agency, if you are a GS3 or an SIS3, the badge is identical. It's a
Wow.
blue badge, your picture, and that's it.
Wow.
It's not like you walk around and you have stars on your lapel or anything like that. So
Yeah.
that's part of what makes our culture very unique. In the U.S. military, which a lot of people don't understand, is that our non-commissioned officer corps is the backbone of our military,
Amen.
which is rare in most other countries. The NCO corps are looked down upon. Ours are not. But a sergeant major cannot walk into the office of a general and go, "Hey, chief, I need to talk to you about something." He's got to go to his captain go to his lieutenant colonel, and so on and so on. In my agency, you can. I like I said, I was an SIS2 sitting as chief of ops, and I would have GS13s coming in and going, "Hey, chief, can I talk to you about something? I got this idea."
Wow. Wow.
So it is a different barrier. We don't, it's still a military organization as
Sure.
far as rank and process and everything else, but we have that lateral, capabilities of communicating with senior officers, and that's part of our grooming process too.
I love that. That's fascinating. I would imagine that encourages a whole lot better communication and trust, and a little bit of a better culture than the than the strict chain of command that is enforced in the U.S. military. I go back to a comment that you made earlier when we first started talking about, when you joined the Air Force, you loved it, you loved action, but you didn't feel like that you were doing anything. And so I found that really interesting. So, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds to me like for those that are that love our country and that have the right personality and that are seeking action and seeking to make a difference. A lot of them do join the military, and maybe a better option, something that a more focused option where it could be more fulfilling because you know what you're doing and you can see the results, might be the CIA path as opposed to the military path. Is that fair?
That's a fair statement. You figure if I would have been, and war is the game changer. Okay, if I would have been able to go to Vietnam in 1992, early 93, which, as you know, they were actually shutting it down by that time. Um, the agency would have not crossed my mind, although I would have been working with the agency because they were very, prevalent in Vietnam during that era.
Right.
And so, but for me, it was the lack of making a difference, not the purpose. I knew my
Okay.
purpose. My purpose was to go behind enemy lines and retrieve one of our soldiers or airmen or sailors that were wounded and could not get out and we were getting shot at. That was our mission, but we were just training.
Gotcha.
I love to jump out of airplanes. I used to do it 3 times a week when I was at pararescue. Um, but that's just for nothing. Where
Right.
the agency, every day when you walk out of that embassy or the cover facility, you have a mission, whether it's to meet an individual for lunch, to gauge him if he's got the potential to be a good source or good agent, um, because he has the right access and the right commonality with us, and you recruit him. So every time you walk out of that embassy, you are on a mission. It's an operation, and that's very rewarding because you're never bored. Every day you have something else to do. You have an agent meeting at 10 o'clock at night. The terrorists that I recruited in that country in South America, I could only meet this guy at 9 o'clock at night by myself in a dark alley. Um, if that's not a mission, I don't know what is.
Yeah. Heck yeah. That definitely sounds like a mission to me. Um, I can only imagine, Rick. I really can only imagine. Well, so you made it to the pinnacle of your profession, right? You were the equivalent of a major general. You were the head of counterterrorism. There are a lot of people in the CIA, Rick. What is it that made you so successful? Or maybe if you want to think about it through maybe a slightly different lens, what is it that makes an individual successful within the CIA?
Well, my success story is not a unique story in the CIA. I mean, you have guys like I said, Cofer Black, Jose Rodriguez, who's another director of the Counterterror Center, a very dear friend of mine, another great boss. But we were friends for years before we ever worked together. We didn't work together until 9/11.
Oh, wow.
So my success story is not, wow, look at this, what this guy was able to do above and beyond anybody else. No. Um, I think that some of the things that I did, first of all, I had a purpose from childhood. You got to understand that when I set foot in Honduras to go to the Nicaraguan border and started dealing with the Contras, I was fighting the same monster that destroyed my family and destroyed my first country. That gave me all the incentive that I needed. Was to, having a bad day, look back to what my parents went through trying to get out of Cuba, and you cowboy up. So my story is not unique. Now there are some things that I have in my favor. Um, I really wanted to excel because it was my way of paying back this country for what it did for me and my family. I developed a debt of honor to this country, and there was nothing I was going to turn down. And there were a couple of things during my career that actually were game changing. I was chief of the Palestinian branch, which I loved. It was great job. When they called me to be the deputy chief of station of the Bin Laden station, most people would, geez, that's not going to go anywhere. Salute, moving, go. Let's go get this guy. Um, Same thing with I studied a foreign, an Asian language. Again, they blacked that out. I don't know why. For 14 months, and it's a hard Asian language. And the division chief called me in, and he said, hey, Rick, I know that you're in your 14th month, you're a 2 level in this particular language, but the chief of station in Korea has asked for you by name for a special program that he's got over there. And I said, oh, whoa, I mean, this is the division chief talking to me now.
Yeah.
And he said, this is not binding, but I have to ask you because the chief of station asked, would you accept that assignment? I took a couple of deep breaths and I did talk about, I've been doing this for 14 months. My wife's about to throw me out of the house because all I do is study this stuff. And I said, sir, I have one question. Can you tell me a little bit about what the mission is? And he smiled and said, no. I said, take it. Because with my clearances, if this is an operation or a mission that you can't tell me about, that's where I want. And I will tell you, a lot of people thought that I was the stupidest guy in the building.
Really?
Giving up 14 months of language, having a 2 level, and then going there for 2 or 3 years and bringing it up to a 4, and that's a platform.
Yeah.
A lot of people. It turned out to be the best career move I made in my life because that chief of station that was in Seoul at the time, we called him King Ralph. King Ralph became the East Asia division chief, and he's the one that brought me back in and gave me the Koreas, which propelled my career into the senior ranks.
Wow.
And the reason I'm proud of that is because I made the decision not with a forethought that, hey, King Ralph is going to be a big shot in the future. No, it was like, this is the kind of mission. And that was the result. That was God's way of saying, boom, yeah, you're in the right path. So I'm very grateful for that. But I always saluted and I always went where they asked me to go.
Gosh, that's really inspiring. And you didn't just go with what others around you thought would be the popular thing to do or the obvious career path just because just for the sake of advancement, right? I mean, you it sounds like the reasons for accepting these assignments were genuine and were true, right? Versus solely looking for career advancement. Is that?
Yeah, I never, when I was a GS-13, they asked me, they do these mid-cycle things, how high I thought I was going to get in the agency, and some thoughts, probably, hopefully a GS-15. So that senior rank was never, what I was chasing. I was chasing the second biggest decision that I made, and it was very personal, and it was a big sacrifice. But it is later part in the book, you'll see. When I was chief of op at the terrorist center, after a year or so doing there, it was early 2012. I'm sorry, 2001, 2002. I told Kofor, I said, we're lacking our capability of chasing these bad guys worldwide. We're kicking the crap out of them in Afghanistan. Iraq had not started yet. We're really putting the screws to them. And we have some allies helping us, but a lot of these guys are working throughout the world. And we saw that come 9/11, where they came from different countries to do what they did. I told Kofor, I said, we need to start targeting the soft underbelly of terrorism, which is their support mechanisms worldwide. And he looked at me and says, how'd you come up with this? I said, well, sir, I started the Bin Laden task force. I saw the frustrations of us not being able to do what we knew that we needed to do preemptively. I became your chief of ops before 9/11, and we knew we were going to get hit. We just didn't know when. My program, and as I explained it, I'm very happy that they allowed that in the book. I thought that we were going to take more of it out, although they took out the good stuff that I was able to do, but not the concept.
Okay.
And the process overall. The concept was taking 2 or 3 targets from each terrorist group and what we call making book on them. Get patterns of life, figure out ways of how do we disrupt this individual. And everybody thinks of Jason Bourne coming in and shooting somebody in the head. No, we had 3 options. Our first option was compromising them. Put something in their car, call the police. As basic as that. The second one was rendition, which is harder than anything else, because when you're trying to take a 180-pound body that doesn't want to go with you out of a country that you're not supposed to be in, it's not an easy task. And the third option is the final option, which would be lethal force, which we have the capability with the agency, and under the lethal findings that we operate in, which is it's a huge point, is that the agency cannot, the agency to do any operation overseas in a non-war zone is under Title 50 authorities that can only be given by the President of the United States. So my concept was go after these guys, make book on them, develop 3 scenarios per each. And then when we get the chatter that we had before 9/11, that we know Al-Qaeda was up to something, they're up to something. What do you think would have happened if we would have been able to take out 3 senior logistic individuals in Al-Qaeda at the same time in 3 different parts of the world?
Oh, wow.
We're compromised.
Yeah.
We are penetrated. They start looking at each other. They start eating each other. So that was the concept. And I was blessed with, my boss at the time, Kofor had moved on, and Jose Rodriguez had taken over as the director of CTC. And I was allowed to go and brief these programs to Vice President Dick Cheney and Condoleezza Rice.
Wow.
And they both agreed on the concept and blessed it and told me, come back when you're ready to pull the trigger, figuratively,
right.
on operations. And, giving up the chief of ops job, I am very proud of this, because we all have an ego. I don't care what people say. We all have an ego. And for me, a little Cuban guy who thought he was tough and got into pararescue, and now you're in CIA, to become the chief of operations at the Counterterrorism Center, that was a badge of honor.
Heck yeah.
That was a title that I really savored, because I still had my hands in operation. I wasn't some coffee boy on the 7th floor or something. I was in that level. But I gave that up, and I spent the last 2 years of my life, I went from having 500 people under me to having 10 guys that we were doing the snooping and pooping all over the world, making book on these guys. And that's where I ended my career, when, again, for political reasons, and this time it was my agency's front office that was vacillating and would not allow us to, they allowed us to make book on the guys, and the stories that were in the book about that they blacked out. You can still see a lot of the spotty stuff, as you will see, but it was something that I was very, very proud of. The fact that me and my handful of guys and gals were able to go to first, second, third, and fourth world countries and get patterns of life on bad guys that are under the eye of the local services and never been compromised. But never allowed it to, even though the Vice President of the United States had approved, said, yes, I want this to go through. When you finished sweating the details and you're ready to go, I went and I told them, we're ready to go on 2 missions, back to back. And it's in the book, that's why I can talk about it. The then director of operations, when I came in for a very, very important mission, after I briefed it, we have all kinds of technology. Those kind of programs, it's all on paper. I had a standalone computer connected to nothing. It was more of a word processor with storage, printed the stuff. And I briefed the DCI, the director, George Tenet, and the DDO. And at the end, the DDO said, Mr. Director, there's no doubt in our mind, that not only can Prado do this, but that he and his team can get away with it. I'm going like, oh yeah, this is high five time.
Yeah.
And then he said, however, we have to look at the political implications of doing this now. After the second time of that experience, that's when I retired.
That makes me want to throw up. What? So, hearing that from you, what I initially reminded me of, you learned a lot of lessons. We learned a lot of lessons from 9/11, that we needed to be proactive, not just reactive. You, based on decades of experience in the CIA came up with a proactive program that would put us in a position to not get hit like we did, but not get blindsided like we did on 9/11. Put in all the work, all the effort, put it together, resigned the position that you were most proud of to do so, and then once you get to the 10-yard line, they say, we're not going to do it because of politics.
Yeah, it was very painful. It was very demoralizing for my crew too, who had done the bulk of the work. Although I was on the ground with them. Um, yeah, I mean it's myopic, and it's funny because even within our building, we have our own intel sources and networks, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
what
sure.
from people with, how would you say, with proven access, who reporting has been further what is it, proven, was that they were afraid that if Prado succeeded in this, nobody gets any credit. If Prado fails on this, they, the seventh floor, would be tainted with these kind of, and those were phrases that were bounced around and eventually got to our ears. So it was very demoralizing, and it's a shame. Part of the problem that we have in the agency is that our directors are brought in from the outside. We have guys like Kofor Black, we got guys like Dewey Claridge, we have guys like Jose Rodriguez, who would be ideal directors of the agency. Why? Number one, they played the game. They know if you are my boss and you don't know what it is to sit in a car at night in a third world country with a known terrorist, with a proven terrorist, how do you empathize with me or what my family goes through or what my mission's all about?
Agreed.
Second, we look up to them because they are taking care of us. They're not there as political appointees. They're there to run the agency. And same can be said about, obviously, the military does that very well. You could be a 3-star general in the 82nd Airborne with, badges up to here and medals, and then they put you to run an Air Force fighter pilot wing, and you're not going to succeed, and you're not going to be respected, and your learning curve is going to be brutal. But most importantly, a political appointee's loyalty is to the administration that put him or her there, not to the people below you that are actually making the things work.
Is that a Title 50 thing? Why is it a political appointee?
I don't know. I mean, we've had one or two who have been, well, I can think only Gina, that was actually a case officer, very legitimate case officer, who became our DCI for a couple of years. I was already retired, but I knew Gina well and highly respected, not as a female case officer, but as a case officer. But the greater majority of the others were political appointees. Political appointees.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe the purpose or the hope was that the president would appoint a homegrown talent that had been there, and it has sort of morphed into a political appointee type thing. I don't know, but that is frustrating. And you point. I think your point is very insightful because it's sort of the who crowned the king question, right? If the head of the CIA is appointed by the president, then the loyalty is political, not to the institution. And for that reason, it shouldn't be a political appointee. But it's all very fascinating to me. And most of the time, when I hear your stories, all I want to do is say thank you for everything that you did throughout your career. Looking back, are there things that you would change if you could do it all over again?
That's a good question. I would almost have to say no, because I now have the benefit of hindsight, and we all have that 20/20 hindsight, but that doesn't count. Um, I would not be where I was at if I did not follow the path that I did.
Yeah.
If I would have stayed as chief of ops in CTC, and pick somebody to run that team and let them run with it, I might still be in the agency. I might be. I was already a deputy division chief once, so I could be a division chief or something. That wasn't. And even with the hindsight, I'll be very honest with you. Even with the hindsight, I would have given up the CTC ops chief job to do what I did on the ground, because it was the ultimate operations that we did, and the guys and gals that I had in that team, they gave me pick of the litter. Any officer in the division, in the director of operations that I wanted, was given to me.
Wow.
Three of my male operators, all went on to be SIS fours, and one of them SIS 5.
Really?
And they were GS 11s and GS 12 and GS 13s when they were working for me in the thing. So just the outcome of that, the fact that I was able to help groom some of this incredible talent that was afforded me, I wouldn't trade that for the world. No rank feels better than that. I have my. He's a very, 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 very dear friend of mine. The guy that retires an SIS 5. He calls me on the phone. The first of the words out of his mouth is, "How's it going, Chief?" I said, "Stop! I should be calling you Chief." He says, "That's never going to happen."
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
The fact,
Yeah.
if I had not done that, I mean, these guys would have still been senior grade anyway. They're talent based or something. But the fact that I was there, and they believe that I helped them with it, that's one of my biggest badges of honor.
I love that. I love that. And that's a legacy that continues to live, right? Because they will continue to teach the lessons that they learned from you to others. Rick, can you explain really quickly? I think also something that's not well understood is the whole senior intelligence officer thing and how that works. And I know that you were the equivalent of a 2-star general, but how do you get from the GS ranks to the senior intelligence? And is that how common is that? Maybe I'll ask.
Well, I mean, obviously, like in any organization, including the military, there's a pyramid. There's a pyramid, and getting to the top is a merit based, very honest for the most part. Although, obviously, again, there's politics everywhere, and there's favors to be done or whatever. But
Sure.
When you go through the farm, you come out primarily as a GS 10, which is like a butter bar second lieutenant.
Yeah.
And then you get your second tour, and you get your recruitments, and you get your GS 13. Now you are a layman. You actually know what the hell you're doing. First tour or so, you come out of the farm thinking you're Mario Andretti, but in reality, you just went through high school driver's ed.
Got it.
But the beauty of the agency, which happens nowhere else that I know of, 90% of our training is on-the-job training. You come out of the farm, you think you can drive the car fast. I cannot afford you to crash the car. So I assign somebody to you that is going to grill you for everything you're going to do. I'm going to go have a lunch with Joe McGillicuddy. Sit down. What is your surveillance detection route? Where are you meeting him? What is your reason for meeting him? What is your tasking? Is he already recruited? Are you trying to recruit him? And so on, so on, so on, so on.
Wow.
So it's all OJT. So you have that GS 13 mentoring a GS 11. You have, so you, in the structures for us is you go from layman to a branch chief.
Okay.
And then branch chief, the next step is a group chief. And then above a group chief is a division chief. So where a group will have, for example, a group chief in CTC, international terrorism group into CTC was at least 6 different branches assigned to it, below it. So, and then from those groups, each division in CTC had several groups, and that's the way it works it worked in the area divisions also.
Gotcha. So is it fair to say the SI level is the same is equivalent to more or less like the general officer level in the military?
It's oranges and apples.
Okay.
When it comes to official protocol, that is exactly the way it is. So let's say that I was just I read my friend's obituary for what he did at the agency at SOCOM about a year ago, and there was a 4-star general, there was a 3-star general, and me, even though I've been retired for several years.
Wow.
So when it comes to diplomatic or official protocol, I would get the parking space next to the Army 2-star general. The mission is very different. A 2-star general might be running 1,000 people. A 2-star, or an SIS-2 may be running a station with 15 officers. But the difference is each one of those 15 officers every single day is stepping out of that building to do an operation of some sort. And that does not happen in the military. You go
Right.
training, you go to language, you go do PT, you do this, and then when you have a mission, you have a mission.
Right.
Uh, Ours is very singular, is very deep, and the consequences. The problem with us when working under state or corporate cover, if we get compromised, the ramifications are brutal.
Yeah.
Uh, you're talking a major international event that can happen. So there's a lot of responsibility there, and again, there's nothing better. And I was blessed with great bosses. That was, if there's anything that I can tell you, is that I only had one boss who was kind of crazy. He only had 3 or 4 months, but every boss that I had from day one to the end were people that kept me humble. And this is a point that I want to make because
Please.
you have thanked me several times, and I get this every podcast. You're this, you're that. I walked in the shadow of giants all my life. The shadow of my dad, the shadow of pararescuemen like Wayne Fisk, the shadow of people like Billy Waugh and Dewey Claridge and Kofor Black and Jose Rodriguez. If that doesn't keep you humble, I don't know what does. And that to me is just something that I really feel very strongly about. That it's a mission oriented for a purpose that's second to none.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. If you could change one thing about the agency, knowing everything that you know, what would you change?
Well, the first one we already discussed. I think our leaders should be homegrown. And that's a big one. The second one is that we should put in power and in front of missions the people that are going to be allowed to execute them. If you look at the success that the OSS had, it was because they were fearless.
Oh,
There was no mission that was too hairy or too complicated or too sophisticated. And I mean, there's dozens and dozens of books on OSS. And I highly encourage anybody that's interested because that is the roots of both the special military operators and definitely the CIA operators. Uh, so putting people in power that are concerned more with the mission and what this country needs, then how are they going to get their next promotion? I never understood that. You're already a colonel rank, and all you could think about is being general. Okay, all right. So you make a general, and all you could think is getting another star or another SAS bump. And it's not the money. It's just the status, and it should be merit driven, but it should also be success driven. The old cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. We are supposed to be the dogs of war. But if you keep me chained up, I can't do my mission. So the agency needs to grow some backbone and maintain that. Go back to in its own leadership. Bill Casey was our DCI during the Reagan administration, and what he was able to do was incredible. Why? He didn't care. He had a mission, and he was going to execute it no matter what. And that's leadership in the ranks that we operate in.
I love that. I love that. Well, after you got out of the CIA, you've done some things in the civilian world. You were at Blackwater. You've been around business and been around executives and business leaders. Do you feel that what makes a outstanding leader in the CIA, do you feel that it's the same thing that would make a great business executive or a great leader in the civilian world?
It translates well, because, like I said, the decisions that our leaders make have international consequences. And something that I used to try to explain to my wife when she was going, "Why are you in such a sour mood? Or why are you always, so intense about things?" I said, "Because when Johnny's father, who owns that car dealer, has a bad day, means he didn't sell enough cars. When I have a bad day, I lost I lost an agent, I lost an officer. So the severity of our mission is very focused on what we do."
Mm. Yeah. So it breeds individuals that have made very difficult decisions under very intense circumstances.
That's correct. So that transfers into, and then the other thing too, because we are so OJT driven,
Mm-hmm.
that is our training. If you carry out that to the corporate world, where you actually implement that, one of the things that I've said for years, once I became a boss of this or that, was to my deputies, I would say, your job is to take the C officer and make him a B.
Mm.
Take the B officer and make him or her an A. And take the A officer and make him your replacement.
Ah.
That's what I learned from my good leaders.
I love it. And I definitely think that I know that translates into the world of business. Well, Ric, this has been absolutely amazing, and I want to be respectful of your time because you've given us a lot of it. There's a question that I ask every guest that comes on, and some people think it's a little bit odd, but it seems to be insightful. If just in the event that God forbid this were to ever happen, but in the event that there was a fire or some type of emergency at your office there in your home, and you had a chance to run back in and grab one thing before the fire took everything out, what is it that you would grab?
No question about it. I have, and I'm looking at it right here. When I was chief of the Koreas, chief of liaison in Korea, President Bush, first one, senior, came in. He was no longer president, but I was in charge of liaison, so I facilitated his event.
Okay.
And at the end, he asked if I wanted an 8x10 sign, and I said, "No, I'm Cuban. I want you to sign my baseball." I had a Major League Baseball
Oh,
that Bush Senior signed it. Fast forward to September 17th of 2001. George Bush Jr. is in my building signing at CTC, at the Counterterrorism Center, signing the lethal finding against Al Qaeda and the Taliban. And I brought the baseball.
oh my
So I walked
gosh.
up to the vice president, to the president. I said, "Mr. President, do you recognize his signature?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Would you add yours to it?" He says, "Of course." So I gave him my Mont Blanc pen. So he actually signed it with my pen. What I didn't know was that there was a photo. There were being photos were taken. And let's face it, I don't care who you are. If you're standing next to a president, you have,
Yeah,
tunnel vision.
I could imagine.
That's all you're looking at. And they took this photograph, and it means the world to me because Cofer Black was still my boss, and he's laughing, and everybody else is laughing, and I'm smiling, and there's a guy in the background by the name of Buzzy Kronkar, was our executive director. And what he was saying was, leave it to a Cuban to bring a baseball to a presidential function. But they actually had a photograph of that, and I have that on my wall where you see Buzzy literally, his mouth is open. Everybody else is laughing, and the president is signing my ball. My
Wow.
family, everybody knows that God forbid that there's a fire. And I have some pretty cool stuff on my walls. That's, if you have to be one, that's the one you're going to take out.
I love it. That is an amazing story too. And I
Something
know
with
how
a
much,
baseball, everything else on there too, so you can see it.
yeah. So I graduated from the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, and my 9/11 happened the year that I graduated. And so on October 11th, it was either October 11th or November 11th. It had to be November 11th. of 2001, he came and visited and essentially gave a press conference from the campus announcing the military action. So that would have had to have been in November. So I was in Bush Jr.'s vicinity around that same time, but not in the same, not in the same type of situation you were in. I love it. I love that you got him inside of baseball. That's fantastic. Ric, this has been an honor, and I very much appreciate it. And Leo, thank you so much for the time. Once we get everything edited and cut up and we have the intro and everything, we'll make sure that you get the link. And is there anything, I want to make sure that, is there anything that has been on your mind or that you want to say, or that if you had the mic for a second, that imagine you were speaking to a group of young leaders, is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you would want the opportunity to say?
No, to tell you the truth, I think that I really enjoyed your interviewing style, and that really just prompted some great ideas based on the optic that you were coming from, and I found that very refreshing. I think we've covered it all. I mean, leadership is the key to everything, and it's earned by your professionalism and by your reputation and how you take care of your people and all that. So I think we've touched on all of that.
I love it. Well, thank you. And I think you'll be proud of what the final product, because I think through what you talked about, it's going to be clear. You gave an expose on whether you know it, whether you can realize it or not. You gave the perfect expose on what it means to be a humble leader, to make the decisions based on the right things, true north, instead of, career decisions or what have you. And I think this is going to be a great example to a bunch of people for how to do things and do them the right way. So
that's a huge compliment. I really appreciate that, Brent. Thank you very much.
Don't forget, everybody, you can find Boundary Breakers in a lot of places. You can watch our episodes on the Boundary Breakers YouTube channel, or you can listen to each podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of the other major podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.